We may be in the universe as dogs and cats are in our libraries, seeing the books and hearing the conversation, but having no inkling of the meaning of it all. Namaste. So before we begin our investigation into finding the magic in life, we have to define some terms. That's so later on when we want to delve deep into the experiences and the evidence and so on, we already have these terms defined clearly, and we don't have to interrupt the flow of the teaching to present them. So when we say finding the magic, what is this magic? What do we mean exactly by magic? Magic here means paranormal experience, a radical, intense experience inexplicable by the conventional reductionist material paradigm. Paranormal experiences or magic can be seen as positive, ecstatic, negative, traumatic, or neutral, denied, according to one's understanding and values. So a good example of a magic experience, a paranormal experience, is telepathy, mind reading. And we'll have some excellent evidence of this to present later on in the series. But right now, I want to define exactly what do we mean by this. Extrasensory perception only occurs when a person is experiencing intense stress and strong emotions. Under the conditions of a controlled scientific experiment, intense stress and strong emotions are excluded. The person experiences intense boredom rather than excitement. So the evidence for ESP disappears. The experiment excludes the human emotions that make ESP possible. So this is why the scientists have not uncovered the evidence. They destroy it by their reductionist paradigm, by trying to eliminate all uncontrolled variables from the experiment. This is the problem, because the cause of the phenomenon they're looking for is, by definition, uncontrolled and uncontrollable. It happens spontaneously when certain conditions arise. And among those conditions are the intensity of consciousness, the intensity of emotion, and the accidental or contingent quality of a stressful situation, an actual life situation, not an artificial experiment in some sterile lab. And this is why experiences like ESP and so on are not validated by the scientific paradigm. They can't be, because it's too narrow. It excludes the very conditions that the phenomenon depends on. Instead, let's look at a much broader definition of magic, a much more general law that can easily be verified by anybody in their own experience. What am I talking about? Traumatic transformation. The secret of traumatic transformation is that the laws of physics can be bent or transcended by extreme states of consciousness, a visionary warping of space and time caused by the gravity of intense human suffering. Most, if not all, quote, supernatural, unquote, phenomenon are manifestations of this warping, a higher level of universal law. So physics or mechanics or even quantum mechanics is not really the highest law in the universe. The laws of consciousness supersede it. And that is because consciousness is transcendental. And consciousness appears in all living entities, not as an epiphenomenon, but as the cause of all other phenomena. So everybody has experienced traumatic transformation. Everybody has dealt with trauma in their life. Is there any person in this world who hasn't? So, by examining our own lives, we can come to understand the causative factor of spiritual growth or becoming, which is something that we went over very early in this channel series. Now, traumatic transformation is a phenomenon known to modern psychology, but in psychology, it's called post-traumatic growth. The accepted psychological term for traumatic transformation is post-traumatic growth, PTG. PTG refers to positive psychological changes and personal development that can occur as a result of struggling with highly challenging life circumstances, trauma, loss, or adversity. So let's learn a little more about post-traumatic growth. Significant cognitive processing involving cognitive structures threatened or nullified by the traumatic events plays an important role in PTG. It mutually interacts with life wisdom and the development of the life narrative and is an ongoing process, not a static outcome. And what are some of the post-traumatic growth outcomes? Appreciation for life, deeper gratitude for everyday life and relationships, relating to others, strengthened interpersonal connections and compassion, personal strength, recognition of one's resilience and inner strength, new possibilities, exploration of new life paths or goals, and spiritual change, increased spiritual awareness or a redefined sense of purpose. So everybody in this world has gone through trauma, the trauma of birth. That's how things start. So because of this trauma, one is imprinted with certain conditioning at the time of birth. And unless one works on this conditioning, it remains with you your whole life. This is the background against which traumatic change occurs. Now, sadhana, or spiritual cultivation, is a special case of this, where one deliberately creates an intense experience in order to change one's conditioning, alter one's programming, reach a higher state of consciousness, a higher state of energy. And we'll be going through both the states of consciousness and the levels of energy that are available to the chakras and their phenomena in the course of this exploration. So the important thing to understand is that trauma can happen to anybody. A car accident, loss of a beloved relative or pet, any kind of injury, emotional problems, and so on. Many, many different kinds of trauma, many different kinds of suffering in this world. By overcoming this suffering and going on to transcend it, we can grow spiritually, either with or without the assistance of scriptural knowledge. Of course, our experience is that scriptural knowledge is superior in providing better coping mechanisms for trauma. But even without it, we will see, we'll quote so many stories about people who went through trauma, or for example, near-death experiences, and came out changed, greater, bigger, stronger, and wiser than they were before. Now, this has a definite impact on the whole understanding of the problem of suffering. The question, if God is perfect, why did he, she, or it create evil and suffering, has exercised theologians since time began. The only answer that does not lead to logical contradictions is this: the world exists as a vehicle or tool, a mirror for God's own self-realization. This purpose requires a certain intensity of consciousness in each individual. If we do not develop this intensity voluntarily, the higher laws of nature and consciousness compel us with various forms of suffering. Now, this is a deep point, And it relates to what we were going over back in the Brihadaranyaka series and Shankaracharya's commentary on it. The purpose of the creation is the self-realization of Brahman. Since Brahman is non-dual, there is no other by which he can measure himself or know himself. So he has to create the apparency of a creation full of all kinds of different beings that can reflect his aspects and actions and energies so that he can know who he is. Therefore, we are required to maintain and attain a certain high level of conscious intensity. But if we don't do that through getting seduced by the comforts of civilized life and so on, then what happens? A calamity occurs. Suffering is visited upon us from without because we have failed to anticipate it and work for it to create those conditions within. I am often asked, I perform spiritual practices as recommended in scriptures, but why don't I get a result? This is how I answer. Ordinary, routine spiritual practices are just that. Practice for the real thing. Spontaneous, traumatic, conceptual, or existential crises created by nature. As Gurdjieff once said, ordinary efforts do not work. Only super efforts count. A super effort is an effort made consciously well beyond our usual range of effort for a definite purpose which is not required by any external circumstances. Tapasya, voluntary suffering. In the light of this insight, that the intensity of stimulus necessary for transformation is so high that it is often considered traumatic, the routine spiritual practices of regulated sadhana seem like a conceit of the ego, that we can make spiritual advancement by our will alone, when actually spiritual practice is just that, practice. The real thing is how we respond when Guru, nature, or the trickster God gives us an intense test. So ordinary, routine spiritual practices are seen, and this is everyone's experience, that they do not give any result. They may increase our knowledge, but they don't transform our being. They don't bring us to higher states of consciousness. Why is this? Because the level of routine spiritual practices, like getting up early in the morning, chanting some mantras or prayers, doing some little puja or something like that, is not sufficient to reach the level of transformative energy. So we have all seen this going on, Go to the temple, there are people chanting and offering this and that and the other thing. And for them, it's just a routine. They do it every day, or at least regularly. And so it is not a super effort. It's a very ordinary effort, just like going to the office or going to school or something like that. People go to the temple, and sometimes they go there just for social reasons, to meet other people and so on. But the real purpose of spiritual life is tapasya, which means austerity, voluntary suffering, which reaches the level of intensity necessary for actual transformation. And this is one of the most important things we're going to be discussing in this series on traumatic transformation.